This episode of the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast is brought to you by Vesperio. Vesperio's Performance Academy offers custom-tailored solutions for service advisors and leaders. From the people who help you know your competition, IntelliCheck presents the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast. The Multi-Point Inspection Podcast brings you news and stories from the automotive world told in an informative and entertaining way. Previously on the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast. On Friday, March the 24th, Ford hosted BlueOval City Live, the first on-site event since it broke ground in February of 2022. The event included booths, presentations that included Bill Lee, the governor of Tennessee, and Ford president and CEO Jim Farley, and a tour of the construction site for the media. And the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast was invited to see the progress.
Welcome to BlueOval City. It's fantastic here, isn't it? You come in and you're like...
In late August, Ford announced that the top-secret T3 truck that will be produced at BlueOval City would be delayed until the second half of 2027, after originally announcing a production date of late 2025. Ford's reasoning behind the delay was that the company was taking the learnings from the F-150 Lightning and realigning its U.S. battery sourcing plan to reduce costs. This announcement, coupled with the news that Ford was canceling its plans to make an all-electric three-row SUV in Canada, opting for a hybrid SUV instead, sent news outlets and social media into a firestorm of reporting and speculation.
Meanwhile, Ford's BlueOval City is still pushing forward after recent announcements about the company slowing down the introduction of its next-generation electric trucks.
Well, it looks like an 18-month delay for production of Ford Motor Company's highly anticipated full-size electric pickup truck at BlueOval City in Haywood County. Ford forced to switch gears on its electric vehicle strategy because of stiff competition, it says, from other automakers with lower costs.
It's a plant so large, Ford calls it BlueOval City. The Ford Motor Company and state lawmakers insist the plant is still moving forward and will eventually charge into the future of EV sales. However, you do have to wonder, what happens if it does fail? If you look back into our archive, something similar has happened before. The hope is, if Ford failed, a future company could benefit from building the framework for a plant so large, they call it a city.
But three economic development leaders in West Tennessee say not so fast. They say that not only is BlueOval City going to happen, and that delays like this are par for the course, but the delays are actually a blessing in disguise. According to Kyle Spurgeon, Aaron Stewart, and Mark Herbison, the reports of BlueOval City's demise have been greatly exaggerated, and the sky is definitely not falling.
Well, good morning. I'm Aaron Stewart. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Brownsville-Haywood Economic Development Corporation, formerly with TVA Economic Development.
Hey, Brandon, I'm Mark Herbison. I'm the President of the Tifton County Community Development Council. And before that, I was the President of HTL Advantage, which stood for Haywood, Tifton, and Lauderdale counties, and I did economic development for those three counties.
Good morning, Brandon. I'm Kyle Spurgeon. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Jackson Chamber, and I've been in this spot for 15 years.
To get a better understanding of the scope of this project and the commitment by so many going back decades, I asked the guys for some background of how Ford came to be in West Tennessee. Aaron Stewart.
Early on, it was Chase and Haynes with the state of Tennessee, and it was Mark who was with us, and then it was myself and the team from TVA for probably the first 3 or 4 months or so. But going back even years before that in Haywood County, there were a lot of good people working there locally with the county mayor at that time and many others, and certainly Bill Adams with TVA Economic Development. They first identified this potential site probably around 2004 or so, 2004, 2005. Nearly 20 years ago now. And working with a firm, McCallum Sweeney, those same decision makers worked very hard and made some initial investments locally to put the land under option, do all of the due diligence studies, make sure that chemically it was okay. The geotech reports were good. There weren't dinosaurs or spotted owls, whatever it might be on the site, that it was safe. It was developable for a large user. And then through the years, it was shown time and time again, and we learned from each one of those. And then, Mark, I guess it was late February or early March of 2021 when Project Aurora came knocking. And we had to sign non-disclosure agreements that bound all of us to confidentiality. And after those were signed, we found out that it was Ford. Throughout about a 6-month process, 7-month process from Q1 of 21 through, I think it was September 28th. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary that this project announced. Lots of good discussions, and then certainly Kyle and the Jackson Chamber and Memphis Chamber 2 played a role in that quality of life, quality of place, workforce piece. I know Kyle will go into that in just a moment, but it was a work in progress across nearly 20 years, thanks to a lot of great decisions, again, locally, with the investments from the state of Tennessee and then also from TVA. When you see that intersection of preparedness and opportunity, you see a good success story.
Well, Brandon, my experience with the mega site goes back to 2005. I had worked in the Middle Tennessee area for many years. In 2005, I became the head of economic development at the Greater Memphis Chamber in Memphis. And so I moved there and immediately got immersed in the mega site. TVA had done their analysis and identified the mega sites around their region. And then we were going through the first round of what's called site certification. So in our world, it's all based around buildings and sites. It's like a car dealership. If you don't have cars on the lot, you don't sell any cars. And so we're very focused on developing industrial sites and buildings. And so I was engaged along with the guy that was at the Jackson Chamber before Kyle, Paul Latour, and we went through the very first site certification with a company out of South Carolina called McCallum Sweeney. And they're coming in to make sure that the site is a viable place for an industry to locate. And went through that process early on, 2005 and 6. Then it was really up to Haywood County and their leadership to actually get the site, to purchase the land. TVA identified it, but it was up to the local governments in those 6 or 7 areas that TVA had identified around their region in 6 or 7 states to go out and get those sites. And so the then county mayor, Franklin Smith, and his county attorney, Michael Banks, went out and worked with the 40 plus property owners out there. Initially, they didn't have the money to pay for the options for the property, to hold that property so nobody else could buy it out from under them. So they borrowed that money from a bank. And so they were able to keep options on that property for a couple of years. And then the second round of option payments came along and they couldn't pay for it. And so they approached the state, which was then Governor Phil Bredesen and Commissioner Matt Kisber from Jackson, Tennessee, and asked if they would be interested in purchasing that property. The state had never, ever in its history bought an industrial site. And so Commissioner Kisber went out and had the University of Memphis do an economic impact analysis to show what impact a 2,000 employee car assembly plant would have for the Memphis region. And they were able to convince the governor to purchase that site. They started those purchases in 2009 and 2010. They paid about $40 million for that property. And then really the heavy lifting began then, where if you understand where the mega site is, it's almost exactly halfway in between downtown Memphis and downtown Jackson on I-40, where the Pilot truck stop is located. But there's no sewer. There was no water system. There's no gas anywhere near there. And so the challenge was how to get the infrastructure on the site. The state had an initial plan when Governor Haslam took over to build a 15-mile sewer pipeline to Brownsville, upgrade their sewer plant. They bought 15 miles worth of easements. They bought 15 miles worth of sewer pipe. But when they found out that that affluent was going to be put in the protected Hatchie River, the environmental groups in the region really didn't like it, filed some lawsuits. And so they had to walk away from that plan. A new commissioner came on board about 2015, decided they would bypass all the historic or designated rivers in West Tennessee and build a 36-mile pipeline all the way to the Mississippi River from Haywood County. It took 4 years for us to get that done. to get the permits, to work with the 130 plus property owners along that 36-mile pipeline, to get the Corps of Engineers to agree to let us put affluent in the Mississippi River. But during that whole time, Aaron, myself, and Kyle showed that site to prospects. We showed that site to Tesla and to Nissan and to Toyota and to really every major car manufacturer and a lot of other types of industries over that period. And I think they would probably agree with me that the reason we never landed anything from 2010 to 2021 because we didn't have sewer out there. And that's such a big, heavy lift to get a sewer plant in place. It's a multi-year proposition. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And quite frankly, the industries didn't trust we could get it done in their time frame. And so Ford came along in 2021. It was such a huge project that it gave us time to do this, a 3 or 4 year build where Tesla wanted to be up and running in a year. Well, the sewer plant was going to take 25 to 29 months to build. And so thankfully it all worked out and we got this great project, which has really changed our 3 lives for sure. And I think will ultimately raise the quality of life for everybody in our region.
So Brandon, I think you just heard those 2 guys give you a Cliff Notes version of what could be a 500-page book. And what they've just summarized is exactly how that project happened. One thing I want to reiterate to start, and we've equated this to winning a World Series, winning the Masters, winning the Stanley Cup, winning a Super Bowl all at one time. But if you look at how, if a team wins a World Series and it goes 7 games, we always remember who closed that game out or who got the game-winning walk-off home run. Many times we forget about those folks that won the first game. As Mark talked about, Governor Bredesen, Commissioner Matt Kisber, Paul Latour, Franklin Smith. If it were not for those 4 gentlemen, we wouldn't be having this conversation today, because what we were able to do is be a part of the games 2, 3, and 4. But without that game 1 win, we would never have gotten here. And it took a whole lot of cooperation. We're also here today because you've got entities that didn't care about who got credit for the project. Everyone worked together extremely well. When Ford came knocking, my first involvement, I guess, was these 2 guys had worked on it for about 3 months. My first involvement, I was on vacation actually and did a virtual call. My job was to sell Jackson in our region from a quality of life and workforce perspective. So I jump on a virtual call, much like this interview we're doing, and I'm selling Jackson. We all watch as we're doing those kind of interviews to see if the body language is right. I was getting a lot of nods, and yes, that sounds great. Well, they stopped me. They said, okay, Mr. Spurgeon, that's great. Jackson sounds like a great place. What are you going to do to take care of your existing industry after we locate? So I went through some things about how we support existing industry. And that goes for the entire region here, in that we look at it as a rising tide lifts all ships. And I'm happy to say Ford has maintained that attitude in that they're working very closely with all of our communities. They don't want to do anything to upset this pro-business environment that we've got in West Tennessee that attracted them in the first place. They've been very involved from a community development level and then interacting with all of us, keeping us up to date to what's going on. I've been in this role since 2009. Prior to that, I was at Jackson Energy Authority. I was aware of what was going on at the mega site, but in 2009, when I started, probably my first 2 years here, 50% of my time was dedicated to mega site work. Then after that, it changed a bit. And then when Project Aurora came along, joining with these guys to make that project happen. And many times Mark and I laugh about this. We need to talk each other off the cliff. Because it's like this project is so big, we'd never worked anything like that before. And the demands and the requests just kept coming. But to TVA's credit, and the state of Tennessee's credit, and our local folks, everyone worked together. We dotted every I, crossed every T. We had an announcement September of 21 when the project was announced. I think Mark said it changed all of our lives, changed all of our careers and what we focus on.
If you've been following the Multi-Point Inspection podcast, you've probably seen the special called America's New Battery Belt, where I document the charging infrastructure that is being put into place across Tennessee's highways and interstates. And since Aaron was formerly with TVA, I asked him about it.
TVA is working and has been working with the state of Tennessee to help electrify Tennessee highways, all the interstates, all the major highways in time. Check me on this, but I think it's approximately every 50 miles there will be chargers. The last time I checked, that was the plan. And, you see people now installing them at their homes as well. All it is basically it's a dryer outlet. It's a 240 volt, 50 amp, 60 amp outlet. It's like a dryer plug on one end. You have your car charging plug on the other, and that's all it is. The infrastructure on site, it was amazing to see. Several years ago, probably 2012 or so, TVA and the state of Tennessee worked together to do some of the preliminary engineering for the transmission lines that would need to be built to serve that site. It was always assumed that it would be an automotive plant or a steel mill, something of extreme significance that would probably need heavy power. Working together, TVA ran those engineering studies to see what it would take to build those heavy transmission lines from several miles away. In fact, it was south of the interstate by one set of lines were about 3.5 miles away. The other set of lines were about 6 miles away. And then the state of Tennessee went ahead proactively bought the rights of way to extend that transmission infrastructure. That alone probably saved close to a year's worth of time. Mark mentioned the wastewater, that because it was not there, the build timeline to get that ready often exceeded the construction timeline of the prospect that was looking at the site. That's a no-go. Those two don't match up. And so the electric side was a little simpler than what a wastewater system is going to be, but still it saved months in that process. When we had those conversations, both in Brownsville, and then we made either 3 or 4 trips to Dearborn through the summer of 2021, electric was always a huge part of that discussion. The OEM piece where they'll build the trucks, they need 30 or 40 megawatts typically, but the battery plant, you're looking at over 100 megawatts needed just for that. And sum total, including the suppliers, you're probably looking at a couple of 100 megawatts or so. That's a very significant build out that it takes. That's why when you drive down Highway 222, the big substation you see on the right, that's the largest substation in TVA's fleet now. So in a 7-state area, that is the biggest substation. So TVA made some very significant investments, and they had to think outside the box to get some things done. But they worked hand in hand with Ford, the state, and everyone locally to make sure that it was win-win all the way around.
Middle and East Tennessee have recently become residential hotspot destinations for people leaving places like California and New York. So I asked the guys if they thought BlueOval City was finally going to give West Tennessee a spot at the adult table. Mark Herbison.
Well, I'll speak to that. I'm a history buff. And to preface all this is that, we're in a really weird business, Kyle and Aaron and I. Economic development is unlike anything anybody else does. It is a long play thing we do. It took 20 years to get BlueOval City. It's a secretive thing because companies don't want people to know, and it is a partnership kind of thing. There were so many moving parts to this project. If any of them had failed, TDOT or TVA or the Memphis Chamber, the Jackson Chamber, or my organization had not really come together in a true partnership and done what we needed to do, it wouldn't have happened. So, some of the elected officials and the public at large really don't understand that, especially the confidential nature of what we do. On any given time when I was at the Memphis Chamber, I might be under 8 or 10 different non-disclosure agreements because companies don't want the press knowing what they're doing before they're ready to do it. Now, BlueOval City is something that is so much larger than Nissan was in the beginning in Middle Tennessee. It's so much larger than what GM and Saturn was. And they're what really transformed Middle Tennessee. If you look at Rutherford County, Williamson County, Wilson County, Sumner County, all those counties around Nashville were little small rural counties before those plants landed. And then you had those communities, especially Rutherford and Murray and Williamson down there right where the plants were, exploded after those things landed there. If you look at Nissan, it started out at 1,800 employees. Today, they've got 6,000 employees. You look at GM, they're still under 3,000 employees there at GM plant in Spring Hill. We're going to open this thing in 27, somewhere between 8,000 to 9,000 employees. The footprint of the plant is twice as big as Nissan is now. Nissan's 6.4 million square feet. Just the battery and assembly plants are almost 14 million square feet. So it is the largest industrial project in the state of Tennessee's history. The spinoff from this, the federal government does what's called the REM analysis every quarter, which is Regional Economic Modeling System, where they look at what every job category creates as far as other jobs in the economy. The highest one, well, I guess maybe aerospace may be the highest one, but one of the highest REMS factors is for automotive assembly jobs. They have a REMS ratio of 7, which means that for every assembly job created, there's 7 other jobs created in the economy. So this thing is going to create tens of thousands of new jobs. The plant's being built for a 100-year lifespan. This is the first plant Ford has built in over 50 years. The last assembly plant they built on a greenfield in America was in 1969, and I was in the first grade. And I'm old. And so we may not even realize the true impact this is going to have 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. But even in the short term, it's already transformed my career, our organization, where we used to just be industrial. I'm more about recruiting people in residential neighborhoods and retail and that sort of stuff. But we're already seeing the benefits. Look at Kyle, look at Jackson, all the development. Look at what's going on in Haywood County. I think it's going to be the most transformative single project that the state of Tennessee's ever had in its history.
Brandon, I would agree with that. One thing I'll say in regards to West Tennessee, if somebody's throwing you a fastball right down the middle, you got to take a swing and you got to make sure that you are in the cage getting ready for that pitch. The communities in West Tennessee that have been prepared for this are the ones that will benefit the most. And just as Mark described what he's doing there in Tipton County, what Aaron's doing there in Haywood County, what we're doing here in Jackson, I think we're all prepared, and the benefits, we're going to see them, and they'll come incrementally. And I think 2 examples are, if you look at the Nissan plant that located in Canton, Mississippi, 30 years ago, Canton, Mississippi didn't really grow a lot. That growth all went to North Jackson, I think the Ridgeland area. If you look at the projects in Tennessee, as we've described, with Nissan and Smyrna, General Motors and Spring Hill, those communities have grown. And the advantage of BlueOval City being right there on Interstate 40 between Memphis and Nashville in a rural community, we've all got the opportunity to grow, because there is no way any single place in West Tennessee can handle all the growth that's coming. We just announced new jet service between Chicago and Atlanta. We hope to add Detroit to that mix. Those things are coming about because of BlueOval City and the growth that people know is coming.
We'll talk about the delay at BlueOval City, rumors, facts, and more after a word from our sponsor. The Vesperio Performance Academy offers custom-tailored solutions for service advisors and leaders. We allow you to select exactly what you want based on your store's needs. After taking our customized learning path survey, we use those results to tailor a learning path specifically for you. You'll have access to our complete learning library, and you can test what you've learned with our knowledge checks. And for managers, our easy-to-use admin dashboard allows you to easily see current activity from your team and access reports quickly. Vesperio's Performance Academy promotes advisor and manager engagement and communication by including the manager after every concept an advisor completes. Vesperio also allows users the ability to add custom dealership assets and processes that all live in one location. To get a look inside the Performance Academy or to get your team started today, go to Vesperio.com. That's Visperio.com.
Going back into early 2021 through the spring and through the summer, because of the nature of the non-disclosure agreements, a lot of things aren't able to be discussed publicly during the recruitment process. And even sometimes some things, even after the recruitment process, are still ineligible to be discussed at times, depending on the nature of that NDA and what all's included. I think it's fair to say, though, Mark, they always gave us a range of dates that were their targets. The best case scenario was going to be start of production in 25. But they also said it could be as late as like mid to maybe Q3 of 26. So it was roughly about a year that was their original target range. And so that they, bumped it from 26 to 27. Not really that concerned. I mean, if you've ever built a house, chances are you probably had a delay building a house. Now imagine building 14 million square feet. Having a delay to have an economy that says, hey, inflation rates are high, consumer spending has taken the foot off the gas just a hair, we see it picking up again. That's not outside the range of possibility or even normality. Again, think about just the sheer size and scope. The battery plant alone is 92 acres under roof. We're going to keep installing the M&E, but we're just not going to go at breakneck speed. You referenced the Toyota plant down in Tupelo. I think they had at least one delay and possibly two when they were building that facility about 20 years ago. I don't think it's that big of a thing to see that there's a delay that's just outside of the range that they had always given us starting 3 years ago.
And Brandon, I'll say this. I've done industrial development for the state of Tennessee, for the Nashville Chamber, the Rutherford County Chamber, the Memphis Chamber. I've literally worked thousands of industrial projects in my career. No project that I ever worked met their initial timeline. And that's just building a building and putting in equipment, not building a sewer plant and a water plant and 2 water towers, a gas system, an electric system. The state was almost a year behind on the sewer system. The TCAT opened almost a year later than they said it would. The original plan to have an interchange at mile marker 39 was going to be finished by 2027. Now will not begin until 2027. So I've never worked a project that opened on the original time frame. Plus, I'll say this for Tipton County, and I'm probably sure for Haywood and others, and Fayette, maybe not as much Jackson because they're much more mature and from an infrastructure and transportation perspective, but it was a total blessing that it got delayed. We are not ready. We've got fewer new housing starts in West Tennessee than we've had since World War II. There's not enough housing. There's certainly not enough sewer infrastructure, which takes a long time to develop and even upgrade. We are right now upgrading the Munford and Atoka sewer systems. Those projects are just starting. We are getting ready to upgrade and extend the Covington sewer system. That hasn't started, but the contract's been signed. So over the last year, if Ford and SK had been hiring thousands of people, the only winners would have been the suburbs of Memphis and Jackson, because we're not ready. We don't have new subdivisions now. We've got plans, and we've got here alone in Covington over 2,000 housing units going through our process. And we need that time. We need a couple more years to be ready. So when they do start hiring the thousands of people they're going to hire, that we get a piece of that pie, that we have people move into Covington and Munford and Atoka and Brighton and Brownsville and all these rural communities that are within 15 miles of this huge complex. And so I would tell anybody, thank God you gave us a blessing in that you delayed this for a while so we can continue to get ready, because certainly the only places that are ready and the only places that really have stuff going on were the places that had stuff going on before Ford announced in 2021. And that's the suburbs of Memphis and Jackson, and maybe a few areas in Fayette County right on the Fayette-Shelby County border. But they were growing before Ford ever announced. That's my editorial about that.
And Brandon, I'll agree with both of those guys. The delay is beneficial for all of us. We can build more houses in West Tennessee. Jackson, we're doing okay, especially apartment-wise, but just like Mark and Aaron are talking, we've got to stand up more single-family homes. There are plans to do that, but not enough yet. So this delay gives us time. A lot of the negativity about the delay when it was announced comes from folks, and you can't blame them. They're not automotive experts, but they're surrounded by people that think they are simply because they've driven a car or bought one before. But when you look at this from a global perspective, other countries don't argue about EVs. It's going to happen. For some reason here, we've decided that unless we're successful in the next 2 or 3 years, EVs are not going to be something that's going to be preeminent in the United States. This is a 10, 20, 30-year project. This is the new River Rouge, and that plant's been up there 100 years. So we're on the very front end. I mentioned baseball earlier. We've probably just got one out in the first inning when you look at the depth of this project. West Tennessee will be extremely competitive on a world stage. We're not being looked at just now in the South or across the country. This is an international project that puts us on that stage. Any amount of extra time that we can get to better prepare ourselves, that's better.
Brandon, I told my board 2 weeks ago, because Brownsville is also making investments in their wastewater system and schools and, hotels and residential and all of that good stuff as well. I told my board this takes us from hyper urgent to just regular urgent in the time frame that we have to get things done. And I think Mark and Kyle and probably many other chamber and officials and mayors around West Tennessee would probably say the same thing.
I asked the guys if they wanted to speak to the rumors that abound on social media stating that the reason BlueOval City is set up more like a traditional automobile plant as opposed to a more vertical layout like a Tesla facility is so that Ford can pivot production in the event electric vehicles are not the wave of the future as predicted. Mark Herbison.
Brandon, I'll speak to it, and it's not political for me at all. It's just social media is just crazy. There's so much misinformation. I just got back yesterday from a big conference in Detroit. It's really incredible if you see what's going on globally with EVs. And China is 20 years ahead of us in this industry. Their facilities are mature. Their processes are mature. We're just starting. We're trying to build a whole new automotive industry, which it took 100 years to build combustible automobiles to the quality they are today in 2 or 3 years. And they've done a great job so far. Politics has gotten so embedded into electric vehicles, and there's so much misinformation that goes around with that. The Chinese government subsidizes their EV industry by over $20 billion a year. And so right now, BDY, the major producer of electric vehicles in China, can sell a Sentra type sedan that'll get 300-mile range with great fit and features for $12,000. Because they're subsidized. We subsidize electric vehicles in our country by about $2 billion a year. And the other thing is there have been more electric vehicle sales in the United States in 2024 than ever in the history of the country. Now, the projections aren't what they thought they would be when they really started building all these plants, but they're selling more and more and more. Range anxiety is a huge issue. But there's even misinformation about that. 95% of EV owners are going to charge their vehicle overnight at home. They're going to drive less than 50 miles a day. They're never going to a supercharger. Now, if you want to go on a trip, that would be, but the average person, 99% of the time is going to be charging that vehicle in the lowest cost energy, off-peak energy overnight. And they're going to go from paying an average of about $1,500 a year for gas to about $500 a year for electricity to pay for that vehicle. There's so much misinformation about it, and there's so much global competition, and politics is a big part of it. It's going to depend on kind of how our government wants to move forward with electric vehicles. But the industry's bought into it. There has been in the last 10 years, $135 billion invested in electric vehicles in this country, primarily most of it in the southeastern United States. And again, when you talk about Ford BlueOval City, it's being built for 100 years. It's being patterned after the River Rouge facility in Dearborn, Michigan, that Henry Ford started building in 1914, which is still producing vehicles today. I challenge everybody to get on YouTube and type in River Rouge and see how fascinating that development was. They're going to build vehicles at BlueOval City in Stanton for the next 100 years. I don't know what they'll be, but they're not spending this kind of money. You see the construction quality of these buildings. Aaron and Kyle will tell you, they're being built for 100-year lifespan. It being the most sustainable, most eco-friendly, most sophisticated, most technologically advanced. And some of their other assembly plants around the country are 75 and 80 years old. It's pretty hard for me to believe they're not going to use that facility for something.
Brandon, and Mark's 1,000% correct. EV sales continue to increase. That although it continues to increase, it's not at the same pace as it was 3 years ago. It's still an increase year over year, and that often gets misreported. Like sometimes you see math coming out of Congress and how they account for spending cuts or growth. EV sales are simply up year over year. And the second thing is Ford always told us that they plan for this to be the most flexible plant in their fleet. Like Mark mentioned a little while ago, this was their first new plant in like 50 years. They're going to spend $6 billion and they're going to do it right. They're going to do it with the future in mind. This is not inside information. Is it going to be completely EV and absolutely nothing else? I don't know. Could they pivot and do something else? I believe they built this plant and are building it with the ability to pivot in mind, because while it may be EVs today, 20 years from now, there may be a new technology that's even better than that. And so they're building everything from the ground up with the ability to pivot however the market should shift.
Brandon, you look at the whole EV industry, around the world, particularly here in the United States, it's in a startup mode. And there is no startup, whether you take Apple, Microsoft, whatever, they didn't take the trajectory that everyone thought they would in the beginning. You pivot, you go different directions. So back again, to this delay, it is a blessing for us. It's not totally unexpected. We live in a world politically where, it's confirmational bias. If you think EVs are not the future, you go to YouTube or you go to your favorite news channel and it'll confirm that for you. If you think EVs are the future, you can go find the same thing on the opposite side. But if you look at the EV sector from a global perspective, it is going to happen. As Mark was just talking about, unless we keep our foot to the pedal, China will completely own this market, and that U.S. will not allow that to happen. So we will be successful. It's just not on the timeline that a lot of folks want to say we need to be up and running by 26 to validate that this is going to work. That's not the case. It's a 100-year project.
One bit of news that tends to get overshadowed by the delay is the announcement that BlueOval SK will produce cells starting in late 2025 for Ford's new commercial van to be built at Ford's Ohio assembly plant.
Yeah, it's exciting and it's encouraging to see that, the battery plant, BlueOval SK, which is a joint venture between Ford and SK On from South Korea. They're going to begin battery production as planned in late 25. Those batteries will be sent to Ohio, where Ford is producing a commercial van that'll be all electric. And so the battery plant will go ahead and be in production. At maturity, the battery plant will have somewhere around 2,000, 2,500 employees. That's encouraging to see that to go ahead and come online and start to build towards that final maturity. But it'll probably be, I want to be fair, this is my speculation. It'll probably be closer to the end of this decade. Even if Ford does begin production in late 27, it'll probably be towards the end of this decade before the battery plant, the assembly plant, and all the suppliers are probably at maturity in terms of employment levels. It's going to take a while to get there. Again, I think it helps all of us across West Tennessee to get our infrastructure in place and those apartments and single family homes and all that'll be needed, plus the spinoffs that Mark referenced a little while ago, kind of that 7-to-1 ratio. It's encouraging that SK is planning to go ahead and start their production here in about a year.
I think just, as you put this together, and I hope you've seen it, how well we work together. And because this project, if you dig back, it only happened because folks worked together. And that's what we're all continuing to do. Our schedules don't allow, but we're constantly texting or emailing each other about, hey, we need to get together for drinks or coffee or something. That kind of teamwork is going to continue to make all this successful.
Well, I would just say, Brandon, that this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving for the next 100 years. If you look at any Ford assembly plant anywhere in the country, it'll have an average of 50 to 100 suppliers that have located over a 30 or 40 year period around it. So long after Aaron and Kyle and I are doing something else or retired or gone, there are going to be economic developers who are going to be working supply companies that are coming to support this facility. So it's very gratifying for me, and I know for my colleagues here, that we got to be a part of something that's going to create a very long legacy for our region, and it's going to produce results where our kids don't graduate from Covington High or from Haywood County High School and have to move to Nashville or move to Austin or move somewhere else to get a high quality job. And that's what we faced for decades in this area. And I think this is the start of really turning that all around forever and ever.
I'd like to thank Aaron Stewart, Mark Herbison, and Kyle Spurgeon for this amazing interview. You can find the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. It helps with the algorithm thingy. Executive producers for the Multi-Point Inspection Podcast are Melissa Marlette and Joe Gibson. It is written, produced, and narrated by me, Brandon Barnett. This episode's featured music is Spirit Guide by Reveille. And check out the full uncut interview on IntelliCheck's YouTube channel, where we talk more about how BlueOval City made it to West Tennessee. This episode was made possible thanks to a proud partnership with Vesperio, which provides tailored solutions to ignite automotive dealership fixed operations, performance, and profit.